You are lying in bed. The room is dark, the house is quiet. And somewhere in the back of your mind, a small voice starts asking questions it has no reason to ask. What was that sound? Is something standing in the hallway? You know nothing is there. You check the locks, you check the windows. And still, some ancient part of your brain refuses to relax. So why does the dark still feel dangerous, even now, in a world built entirely out of light switches? The real answer is far stranger than simple fear. It is a survival system, thousands of centuries old, still running quietly inside you tonight. Start with the obvious question. Humans are not nocturnal animals. Your eyes are built for daylight, not darkness. Compared to a cat or an owl, your night vision is almost embarrassing. Researcher Isabella Capellini has studied the evolution of sleep and activity patterns across mammals, and her work highlights something important. Humans evolved as a strictly daytime species, active in daylight and vulnerable after dark. That vulnerability did not disappear just because your ancestors built shelters. It became something deeper. It became instinct. Think about what nighttime actually meant for early humans. No streetlights, no flashlights, no security cameras, just darkness stretching in every direction, hiding whatever might be moving inside it. Large predators, the kind capable of killing an adult human without much effort, were often most active precisely when visibility dropped to nearly nothing. Lions, hyenas, leopards. For a creature with weak night vision and dull claws, darkness was not a mood. It was a genuine tactical disadvantage. Here is where the psychology gets interesting. Anthropologist Sarah Blaffer Hrdy has written extensively about the extreme vulnerability of early human infants and how it shaped human social behavior. Human babies are born helpless for years, unable to defend themselves, unable to run. At night, that vulnerability multiplied. A parent alone in the dark, unable to see clearly, guarding a child who could not fend for themselves, faced one of the highest stakes situations imaginable. Fear, in that context, was not weakness, it was function. Pause and consider what fear actually does inside your body. It is not just an emotion, it is a full physical alarm system. Your heart rate increases, your pupils widen, trying desperately to gather more light. Your muscles tense, ready to react in a fraction of a second. None of that is random. Every part of that response evolved for one very specific purpose: to keep a slow, weak-clawed primate alive in an environment where a predator could be 3 feet away and completely invisible. So think about your bedroom for a second. Nothing is actually hunting you. There is no leopard behind the curtain. But the alarm system inside your body does not know that. It cannot tell the difference between a genuine ancient threat and an empty hallway at 2 a.m. It simply reacts the way it has reacted for hundreds of thousands of years, because that reaction kept enough humans alive long enough to become your ancestors. Now for the part most people never consider. Fear of the dark was never meant to be experienced alone. Researcher Robin Dunbar has spent decades studying how early human social groups organized themselves for survival, and one consistent pattern shows up again and again. Groups clustered together at night. Fires were kept burning, not just for warmth, but as a shared signal of safety, visible to everyone in the group at once. Sleeping near others was not a comfort preference. It was a defense strategy, distributing the risk of an attack across many pairs of eyes and ears instead of just one. This changes how you should think about a very specific, very common feeling. Have you ever noticed how being alone in the dark feels different from being in the dark with someone else nearby, even if neither of you says a word? That is not a coincidence, and it is not childish. It is a deeply old recognition that safety, historically, was never an individual achievement. It was a group one. Consider what this meant practically for early humans. A single person standing watch at night could fall asleep, miss a sound, or simply fail to notice movement at the edge of the firelight. A group, spread out slightly and alert in shifts, covered far more ground with far less risk. Darkness turned a solitary human into an easy target and a grouped set of humans into something far harder to approach unnoticed. Survival, quite literally, depended on not being alone when the sun went down. Now here is the twist that reframes almost everything. The fear itself was never really about darkness. Darkness was simply the condition that removed your most trusted sense, sight, and replaced it with pure uncertainty. Your ancestors were not afraid of black space. They were afraid of not knowing what was inside it. And uncertainty, for a body built by evolution to survive constant real threats, is often processed exactly the same way real danger is. This explains something strange about modern life. You can be perfectly safe, locked doors, alarm system armed, phone fully charged, and still feel that same tight, alert unease the moment the lights go out. Your rational brain knows the statistics. Your ancient brain does not care about statistics. It only cares about one question. Can I see what is around me right now? When the answer is no, an old alarm quietly switches on, regardless of what century you happen to be living in. Think about children for a moment, because this pattern shows up almost universally. Nearly every culture on record has some version of a child afraid of the dark, checking under the bed, needing a nightlight, calling out for a parent after the lights go off. That is not a flaw in modern parenting. It is closer to a fossil, a behavior preserved almost perfectly from an environment where a child alone in the dark, without an adult nearby, was in genuine and immediate danger. Now think about how this shaped culture far beyond simple fear. Fire became one of the most significant technologies in human history, not only because it cooked food, but because it extended visibility deep into the most dangerous hours of the day. Groups that mastered fire were not just warmer. They were safer, longer, later into the night, in ways that groups without fire simply were not. Fire pushed back the exact conditions that made humans most vulnerable, and that advantage rippled through nearly everything that came after it. Stories likely followed the same pattern. Long before written language, oral storytelling around a fire at night may have served a purpose beyond entertainment. Stories that described threats, warned about dangerous animals, or reinforced group cohesion could have helped keep people alert, together, and cautious during exactly the hours when caution mattered most. The campfire story is not just a nostalgic image. It may be one of the oldest survival tools your species ever developed. Now return to your bedroom, because the picture is finally complete. That tightening in your chest when the house goes quiet. That instinct to glance toward the doorway one more time before falling asleep. That comfort you feel with even a small light left on somewhere in the house. None of that is irrational. None of it is a personal weakness you need to fix. It is a functioning alarm system inherited across hundreds of thousands of years, doing exactly the job it was built to do, in a world that no longer needs it quite as urgently as it once did. Consider how this fear shows up differently depending on the environment around you. Notice how a dark bedroom in a locked house still feels manageable, but a dark forest, a dark parking garage, or an unfamiliar dark street can trigger something sharper, faster, harder to shake off. That difference is not random either. Open, unfamiliar darkness strips away nearly every advantage your ancestors relied on: known terrain, nearby group members, a clear escape route. Familiar darkness, inside four walls you know well, keeps at least some of those advantages intact, which is part of why it feels less threatening, even though visibility is identical in both cases. Think about the specific sounds that tend to trigger this response the fastest. A creak, a rustle, a sudden shift in the quiet. Researchers studying auditory processing have found that human hearing becomes measurably more sensitive in low-light conditions, almost as if the body is compensating for the loss of one sense by sharpening another. This is not imagination. Sound genuinely carries differently in your attention at night, because for most of human history, An unexplained sound in the dark was one of the only early warning signs available. A snapped branch could mean nothing. It could also mean something was approaching. Your ancestors who paid close attention to that difference tended to survive longer than those who did not, and that heightened sensitivity never fully switched off. Now think about why certain shapes in the dark feel unsettling even when you rationally know what they are. A coat hanging on a door. A shadow cast by a tree branch against a curtain. For a brief moment, your brain sometimes reads these as something else entirely, a crouching figure, an animal shape, before correcting itself. This is often described as a kind of pattern completion error, where a brain wired to detect threats quickly would rather flag a false alarm than miss a real one. A few extra startled heartbeats over a coat rack cost you almost nothing. Missing an actual predator crouched in the shadows could have cost your ancestors everything. Evolution, in this case, clearly favored the cautious mistake over the fatal one. This is worth sitting with for a moment because it reframes something that can otherwise feel embarrassing. That jolt of fear from a shadow that turns out to be nothing is not your brain malfunctioning. It is your brain succeeding at exactly the job it was built for. Erring hard on the side of caution in an environment where caution once meant the difference between living and not living, to pass on that same trait. Now widen the lens one more time, because the story is not only about individual fear. It is about how that fear shaped entire communities, groups who slept clustered, who kept fires burning through the night, who took turns staying alert, were not simply calmer. They were functionally safer in a measurable biological sense, and over enough generations that safety translated directly into survival and reproduction. The instinct to seek company in the dark, to feel unsettled by isolation after sunset, was not an accident sitting alongside human evolution. It was one of the forces actively driving it forward. You are lying in bed. The room is dark, and the small voice asking questions in the back of your mind is not broken. It is ancient, patient, and quietly still doing its job.